Are you ready for the next thing? Are you? Thank you. Okay. Next bit. Okay. So again, in this section we've said, okay, we've decided we're going to do an observational study, or maybe we've decided we're going to do an experiment. So we know what we're going to do, we know what questions we're going to ask. Great. And we know what topic we're going to study. Now what do we need to do? Need to get the people. Absolutely. How? And that's the next question. So remember that all your subjects collectively, we refer to that as your sample. So we now need to go sampling. How do we get a sample? Offer money.
If you have it.
Okay, right, assuming you have a budget, right, exactly. Okay, so one way to get subjects is to pay people. I'll give you $5, $10, whatever, to participate in my study. Okay, has anyone here ever done that? Has anyone ever seen a sign saying, please come participate in my study and I'll give you a couple dollars? Okay. Focus groups, okay. That a focus group is a study. Because what happens when you're in a focus group? Because what is it that they're after? That's a survey, that's a study. Okay. Focus group is a industry term for a sample. That's all it is a sample. Okay. So pay money and get subjects, that's one way to do it. Another way to do it would be I just go down to the corner and ask the first 20 people that come by. And that's also a very common way to do it.
Might get a couple no's.
Of course, and we actually talked about that the first class, people not participating. So that's more of like a problem than and something else we'll discuss also. Right. So these are probably two of the most commonly used techniques of how you get a sample, and there are good reasons for them, but there are also bad reasons or bad aspects of them. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit right now. So if I were to go downstairs and just ask the first 10 people that walk by, would that give me a good sample?
You're probably going to get a couple of them. You're not going to get that.
Okay. Let's say the first 10 people that respond, the first 10 people that participate. Is that going to give me a good sample? No, why not? Okay. Oh, so you're already telling me what I need to do to vary it up a bit. But what's wrong with just going downstairs and taking the first 10 people that agree to participate? And what's wrong with that?
Influence of a group.
Okay. Right. So for example, this is called the convenience samples. We'll talk about in a second. If you just go and take, say, the first couple people in an area, there tends, because they were gotten in a similar location, or maybe they're traveling together, they probably have a lot of similar characteristics. Now, is your goal to find out what people walking down the street at 12:30 think of the ice cream flavor, or think of the politician? No, your goal is to find out what who thinks.
People in general.
People in general, or let's, for argument's sake, let's say United States citizens, right? Or in the case of ice cream, we want to find out what everybody in the United States who buys ice cream, what their preferences are. So just asking the first 10 people that walk by, is that going to be representative of all ice cream buyers in the United States? No. So that's not a good sample. So what do we have to do, or what would be true about a good sample? Or what do we do in order to get a good sample? Okay, do it in different places. Absolutely. That's cluster sampling. We're going to talk about that in a minute.
Different ages, find people of different age groups.
Find people of different ages. That's stratified sampling. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But the most fundamental idea of how you get a good sample is that it should somehow be random. You should in some way be randomly selecting people from your population so that your entire population is represented. Okay. So a random sample, or a simple random sample, is a sample where every member of the population has an equal chance of being selected for the sample. So how could we do this? Well, on a very small scale, let's think about this class. What if I wanted to conduct, at the end of the semester, conduct 1-hour interviews to ask you about this class and get your feedback about the class? Now, I could do it with everyone. There was about 25, 30 students here. I could do it with every single student, but it'd probably be really hard for me to do a 1-hour interview with every single student at the end of the semester. So most likely, what would I do? I would take 4 or 5 students. Now, what should I do? Should I say at the end of the semester, okay, who would like to sit down with me and talk for an hour about the class? Raise your hands. What's wrong with doing it that way? I would likely get who? What would likely happen?
You're going to get students who enjoyed the class.
Most likely I will be getting more so students that enjoyed the class. Okay.
So you select at random.
So we select at random, absolutely.
Would you
So
select by grade or like by what they got in the class? Or would you
okay.
select just random?
Yes and yes. So one way to do this is completely randomly. So for example, in the class like small like this size, I could just say everybody in the class roll a die, everybody who rolls a 2, I'm going to interview you. Now of course I can't force you to sit down for the interview, that's another problem entirely. But just in terms of getting your sample. Okay. Here we go. Another way to do this. Now of course if your population is is United States citizens, you're not going to have everybody sit down and roll the die. So how do you get a random sample from such a large population? Well, I think the next one is something that a lot of us have been victims of at one time or another. A computer randomly generates phone numbers. Anybody ever get a randomly generated phone call? Yes, okay. So you're familiar with this. Let me just briefly comment that I believe the textbook makes a distinction between a random sample and a simple random sample. For our purposes, we're not going to make that distinction. For our purposes, it's just the same thing. And so don't worry about that. Okay. So another type of sampling is convenient sampling. Choose a sample that's convenient. Well, we already talked about this. This method is, of course, used very commonly, but is it a good idea? Probably not always a good idea. Right. So let's say a reporter is writing an article on people's opinion of the president. So what is the reporter likely to do in order to get quotes and get people's opinions? One way to do it is to simply say a friend of a friend, call up somebody and do it that way and get a couple friends of friends. Another way to do it, which is quite common, is they just go down on the street and ask people as they walk by. Now what's the problem with this? If a reporter were to go downstairs and stand on the corner and get people's opinion of what they think of President Obama, what are likely to be the results?
Well, here in school, I think,
Literally downstairs on the corner.
well, it's pretty young over here, and I'd say Obama has the young vote, so it's probably going to be a positive outlook on it.
Right. Does everybody agree with that? Okay. Now, what street corner could we go to and randomly interview people and yet get a completely different opinion? How could we arrange that?
Go to Cold Spring Harbor, Long Island, where Sean Hannity lives.
Go to.
You'll get a great.
Okay. Right. Go to Sean Hannity street corner and ask people around there. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Let's think outside the box.
Is it in New York?
Did I say New York?
Go to the South. Go to the Midwest.
Okay. Let's go to a street corner in Midland, Texas. If we randomly ask whoever's walking by, what are the opinions of Obama likely to be? Generally negative. Okay. So even though technically you're not controlling who's walking by simply being on that street corner, it's not completely random. So convenience samples are often used, but they're not the best sample because they do not accurately reflect or represent the population as a whole. Okay. So another technique for getting a sample is systematic sampling. Now this technique of sampling assumes that we have some kind of master list. Well, doesn't really assume it per se. But it says that you select every kth person. So one way to do this would be, for example, if you wanted to say interview the people of Manhattan. How could you get a list of more or less everybody in Manhattan? Phone book. Absolutely. They still make those, yes. Okay. So you could take a phone book, and then what do I mean by every kth person?
Every 1,000 person.
Every 1,000th, right, or every 100th name in the phone book. Absolutely.
I don't know.
K's 1,000, K's 100, K's whatever you want it to be.
Okay.
Exactly. Okay. And of course you have to choose your starting point kind of randomly. So you'd say I'm going to start da 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 boom here. Say I'm the 6th name, and then choose every 100th person. Okay. And that's systematic sampling. Yeah. What is going on? Alright. Sorry, okay. Okay. So finally, we'll get to there are two more techniques of sampling that I want to talk about, and these techniques are the ones often used in the real world when dealing with a big population. If using direct simple random sampling is not necessarily available or the best way to go. So the last two actually already came up. Someone said, oh, you said, how would you choose the students from the class? Would you take maybe some who had each, like some people who got an A, some people who got a B, some people who got a C, like that? Okay, that is a type of stratified sampling. So what is stratified sampling? Stratified sampling is you choose different groups within your population and select from each one. So how would this work? So for example, a presidential panel chosen by the president includes women, it includes minorities, and it includes Democrats, and it includes Republicans. Okay, or like you said, make sure you include some people who got each level of achievement, each kind of grade in the class.
Or age.
Or age, you also said age, absolutely. Okay. So this is the general idea. Now, precisely how do you do this? You have to choose one or more characteristics: wealth, race, gender, age, grade, and select people with different quote-unquote amounts of that characteristic. So for example, suppose we were going to stratify our sample using gender. Well, what are the different possible values for gender?
Male, female.
Male and female. So what would you do? You'd make sure that you got some males and also got some females.
Probably around the same number of each.
And why would we want to have the same number of each?
If it's more of a women-dominated thing, it's gonna, it's not gonna be accurate.
Okay, right. But let's talk about this. Let's talk about equal numbers for a second. Let's suppose that we're going to stratify our sample using wealth. So how many different possible levels of wealth are there? Okay, so you could say rich and poor. The typical classifications that you've probably heard of: lower class, middle class, upper class. So I'm just going to use that as an example. Now, let's say, for argument's sake, your sample had 30 people. Would you include 10 lower class people, 10 middle class people, and 10 upper class people?
Sure.
Remember that what makes a good sample is a sample that accurately reflects the population.
Well, there's fewer middle class people than there are lower class people, so you want it to be proportional to.
Exactly. And what about upper class people? And you have fewer upper class people as well. Typically, by any definition that there is of upper class, there's not they don't make up 1/3 of the population. So let's say, for argument's sake, that the upper class, however you define that, makes up 10% of the population.
10%
Then
of your study has to be.
Exactly. So if your sample had 30 people, how many people should be from upper class? 3. Okay. So again, the idea is that the sample is supposed to reflect the population. So exactly like you said, make it proportional. Okay. Which is why, going back to the previous question, if you're going to stratify on gender and you're going to have men and women, there's approximately an equal number of men and women, at least in the United States. So it would make sense for the sample to have, assuming your population is the United States, your sample should have an equal number of men and women. Okay. Now, there is a tricky, if you want to make a stratified sample, there are some tricky and difficult issues you have to deal with. Does anybody want to guess about what those might be?
I think there's the resources to do that.
Okay, so well, yes, you need the resources, but that aside, just in terms of design. Who should be represented? Suppose, like I said before, suppose you stratify your sample along gender. You have men and women. Okay, great. I chose 10 women CEOs and 10 men CEOs. Is that reflective of the population?
No, because there
No.
are fewer women CEOs.
Right.
Well, I don't know about that actually, but I think that.
But is that reflective of the United States population?
No.
No, of course not. Okay, so then what else do you have to do to make it reflective of the population?
Have prior knowledge to.
What else do you need to consider, I should say? Gender. What else? status in terms of
CEOs, they're successful.
Okay, education level, their age, their wealth level, their race, right? Gender we already said. So, but the question then becomes, which of these characteristics do you make sure to account for when you're stratifying your sample?
Can you do any without?
You can do any, but if your sample is going to be 20 people, can you represent every single possible combination of gender, race, wealth, age? No, you can't. And also, so that becomes an issue. Which of these then become important things that you need to account for? That's a choice that you have to make. That's one thing. Another thing is, let's think about race. Well, okay, let's make sure we get every race represented. Go. Did you know that on United States Census forms, or actually general sort of questionnaires back in the 50s, under race, it would say white, black, other. That's obviously no longer a reasonable thing to do. So what should the choices be? Who should be represented? Okay, who's everybody? Okay, we got black, white, Hispanic, Asian. Is everybody represented?
And then they put others.
Right.
How many others are there? It's just going to mess everything up.
Exactly. Is it fair to leave out Middle Easterners? Let's see. Is it fair to group all of Asia together?
That's
Okay.
part of Russia. They might be.
But okay, right. But so notice that if you're actually going to once you actually choose a characteristic and you want to break it up, you then have choices to make about how do you break this up, right? When we talked about wealth, we said lower, middle, and upper. Where's the cutoff line? That's another choice that you have to make. So there are all these issues that you actually have to deal with. Okay.
You can't get everyone from every age as well.
Exactly. How do you break up ages? You know, these are all choices that you have to make. That you, as the researcher, the person doing the study, would have to make. Okay. And there's no right way to do it. You just have to do it. Okay. So that's stratified sampling. Next, somebody. Wait, I think you said go to different places and ask people. Okay, that's the basic idea behind cluster sampling. Cluster sampling. Break your population into, I shouldn't say into many regions. Break your population into regions. Choose a couple of those regions. And then sample from those selected regions. Alright. So what exactly does that mean? I'll give you the basic example of cluster sampling. Exit polls after an election. So on election day, what's very typical is that newspapers or TV channels want to be able to try to predict the winner, but they want to predict the winner of the election before all the different counties actually report the results from voting. So what do? How do they find out how people voted? They ask people. And the way they do that is they'll send reporters or whomever or volunteers to the polling stations. And as the people have just voted and they're leaving, they'll say, Who did you vote for? Who did you vote for? Who did you vote for?
It's rude.
Okay. There's actually, I think, one of the articles that is available among the extra credit assignments, which I'll talk about soon. There's actually an article about doing exit polls and that sort of sampling and to what extent it's good or bad or rude. Okay, but for now let's just think about the design. So is it possible to send, say you're a TV station, is it possible to send a reporter or a volunteer or an intern to every polling station, say, in the country? Is it possible to send someone to every polling station in the state? I don't even know if it's possible to send a reporter to every polling station in the city, at least in New York City. There are polling stations every every 5 blocks. Now, granted, New York City is very, very dense. Other places will have the polling stations will be more spread out. There are fewer people.
And different age groups go to each one. Like I know a lot of old people go to schools.
Right. Well, you go to the polling station that you're assigned to. There's no choice for that. Yeah. Okay. But so what do? You simply you have your resources are you have say 50 reporters. You have to send them to polling stations. You can't send them to every single one. So what do? You choose 50. Randomly. Absolutely. So what you have to do is we've already made a choice actually. We've said we're going to take the entire country, or if you prefer the entire state, and break it up into polling and divide it by voting district. So once you've divided the state, say, into voting districts, you got 50 reporters, so you get to choose 50 districts, and then send one reporter to each one, and then have them conduct the exit poll survey there. So why do we use cluster sampling? We use cluster sampling because our entire population covers too much ground and our resources don't allow us to cover all that ground. So we have to narrow the amount of ground that we're going to cover. So we choose a couple of those regions and we choose them randomly. And hopefully by choosing them randomly, those couple of regions are reflective of the entire population. Okay. So we just talked about all these different kinds of sampling. Any questions? Okay. Let me try to help you get your thinking caps on, and we'll talk about this example. At a high school, when voting for where to go on the school trip, a newspaper reporter asks 20 freshmen, 20 sophomores, 20 juniors, 20 seniors. So first of all, what kind of sampling is this? Yes? Is that what it is? Okay. Is this stratified sampling? Okay, good. Now, what is the characteristic that we are using in order to stratify our sample? Which, sorry, what? Yes. The high school is not how we're stratifying. The high school is the entire population.
By class?
Yes. So you could say, all meaning the same thing. You could say by class, you could say by grade, or you could say by age. Those are all about the equivalent thing. Okay. Okay. And what are the different values of grade level or age that are represented? Freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. Okay. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions about anything that we talked about today? Question? Question, or it's good? It's good? It's good?